Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can I have your attention for some general safety and information announcements before we start the meeting? Just take note of the emergency exits. There's one at the back of the room there on the right and one down there. If you require any assistance, please let a member of the Policing Authority staff know. As usual, and as you'll be aware, the event is streamed and a video recording will be made of the event for online broadcast. So if everyone could just check that their mobile phones are off now and just be aware that anyone present may appear as part of the record. Silence observed at all times, and if you do need to leave the meeting, just leave it quietly and go through the door down there at the back without disturbing things. And as usual, today's meeting is an engagement between the authority and the Garda Commissioner. You're present to observe. There's no opportunity for anyone other than the authority and Garda representatives to participate in the meeting. Thank you very much. Chairperson.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Richmond, and my name is Elaine Byrne, and this is my first meeting, a public meeting as Chair of the Policing Authority, and I step in very big shoes that of Bob Collins and Josephine Feehily before him. So I hope to do them justice in my term of office, and thank you very much. So this marks a historic month for policing in Ireland with the signing of the Policing, Security and Community Safety Bill into law by the President earlier this month, and it marks a number of significant changes in the next year or so, and the coming months even, for oversight of Gardaí in Ireland. So for example, the Policing Authority and the Garda Inspectorate will shortly be replaced by the Public Community, or the PSA Authority, and the GSOC will be replaced by a new office, the Police Ombudsman, and we will also have a new body, the Independent Examiner of Security Legislation, and the joint public committees will be replaced by the local community safety partnerships. A third thing I wish to draw attention to today at this meeting is the recent success that Garda Síochána have had in significant drug seizures. In February alone, there's been almost 40 million in, or over 40 million even, in drug seizures, with significant seizures, for example, in Cork and Kerry of just under 33 million, 6 million in Wexford and Rosslare on the same day, and then a further 3 million in Dublin. And in comparison to last year, in the overall drug seizures that have been conducted, it suggests that Ireland, the Guards are very much on course for seizing a significant amount of drugs this year, going by what has been seized already in February. So, Commissioner, would you like to say anything on that?
Thank you very much, Chair, and you're very welcome from our perspective to your new position, and we wish you every success. In respect of just the police work that's gone into recent drug seizures, this is both a national and international effort. We work closely, obviously, with law enforcement partners. We have a range of transnational organised crime groups that we're targeting and working against. A lot of this work is led by our own Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, and there has been very significant recent successes. But the work of DOCB shows just, which is always at the higher end of the market in terms of big importation and supply type organisations, just shows you the variation in drugs that are being brought into the country for the purposes of crime. And we also have to assess that perhaps we're also being seen as a transit country, either into the rest of Europe or to elsewhere in the world as well. So that is a significant new development for us as in Garda Síochána, and then how we work with others. But if I might turn to Justin just on some of the specific detail of recent operations, as much as you can provide it, Justin, against the ongoing need to investigate and report individuals. Thanks, Justin.
Sorry, my apologies, Chair.
Before we come to Justin, Commissioner, do you have any concerns about the type of drugs that is being seized, or the type of drugs that you're seeing on the streets?
Well, at the Cross-Border Organised Crime Conference on Tuesday, we had a very in-depth presentation just about the range of drugs which are coming into the country. But what is clear is the variety of presentation in terms of drugs like cannabis are presented, and then the variation in the strength of those drugs. And it was reported that cannabis has now eclipsed alcohol in terms of presentation in our accident emergency centres, and also then the range of drugs as well, and the variation of strength. So beyond cannabis and even things like cocaine, but also then particularly the these artificial opioids that are produced, these synthetic opioids, and the range of strength there is in those. And I think one of the great problems there with those is that that a dose which has an impact on your behaviour and gives you a high is very, very close also then to a fatal dose. And there is little room actually for manoeuvre in respect of that, and people are genuinely risking their lives. This has been seen obviously and well reported in the USA around fentanyl, but it's applicable to all synthetic opioids. I might turn to Justin.
Thank you, Commissioner. My apologies again, Chair. I suppose, as the Commissioner's referred to, there's some of the weights of the seizures, and as noted by yourself in your opening address, so I mean, this is something we're seeing across Europe, the increased tonnage of some of the seizures. So there's a number of reasons behind that, and I suppose when we look to South America, we know that eradication programs are reducing there, so the amount of cocaine being produced is increasing. There's huge stockpiles across the supply chain. So on one side, obviously, from South America and a number of countries, there's large stockpiles of product ready to move. And then obviously in Europe and North America, there's markets with increasing usage. And Europe, as you were probably aware, has now eclipsed USA and North America as the prime market for cocaine and the prime usage area for it. So, as I said, we've seen that in seizures, not just here, particularly around the big ports in Europe, particularly around Antwerp, Rotterdam. Some of the seizures are, bigger than ever seen before. Recently in the UK, we saw one was 5 tonnes. Our own on the MV Matthew, south of Cork, was 2.2 tonnes. So I suppose I looked at some of the reasons behind that, and just to touch on some of the seizures that you spoke about, the extremely large one down in Kerry, that was somewhat unusual in that there was a lot of work done there by a local drugs unit, so local teams on the ground who developed a lot of the work behind that, and then supported by national units. And we've seen a similar situation in a number of those seizures around Dublin as well. So all excellent work by local drugs units, supported by national units. And I think what's also of note is some of those seizures as well, it's not just about the amounts, as I've said before at some of our meetings, it's some of the people who are being arrested. So obviously what we try and do is target people further up the chain, higher value targets, and some of those in some of our recent cases have been at that absolute upper level. So I suppose that's an overview of what's going on with some of those recent seizures. And as the Commissioner referred to around the synthetic opioids, the nitazines we saw in November here in Dublin and down in Cork. So, obviously it's something we're really concerned about. We're working closely with the HSE around early warning. We've had a very close interaction with Forensic Science Ireland in relation to our testing to make sure we're not missing anything. And I know the fentanyl is something the Commissioner has obviously spoken of now and previously. I mean, it's something we're really worried about. But I mean, FSI, they haven't seen it yet in any of. There has been a number over the years, but there's nothing recent in it. And I'm very satisfied. I had a meeting with the director of FSI, and I'm very satisfied that what we're bringing in, the opioid samples we're bringing in, there's nothing in them. They're often infiltrated with fentanyl. That's how it starts, but we're not seeing that yet. But I think we'd be naive to think we're not going to see some of that here, because looking back and with our experience of, say, crack cocaine, we obviously saw that in North America and went to the UK, and now it's obviously here a number of years, and it's well established in our own drug market here. So, but like the drug market is obviously ever evolving, and finally, I think the situation in Afghanistan. The opposite situation is in train there, in that the Taliban have started a huge eradication project there, particularly around in Helmand province, which is one of the biggest heroin producing areas. And the results of that we haven't seen here yet, because again, in the chain, there is supply along the chain still, but at some stage that is going to start to hit the chain, and there will be it will affect the market for heroin here and in Europe. And then we'll have synthetic opioids. Well, it's our assumption that they will fill that gap, and that is, synthetic opioids is really concerning, because obviously they can be produced in urban areas. They can be obviously, with cocaine, the coca plant, with the poppy in Afghanistan or Pakistan. You need huge agriculture support and all that. Synthetic opioids can be produced in the urban area, so you can see the potential from that. So, so I think that's an overview, I think, of the current situation. I don't know if you have any particular other questions on it.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. So before we begin the meeting, the Policing Authority would like to record its appreciation for the service to policing by Deputy Commissioner Anne-Marie McMahon, who will shortly be leaving on Garda Síochána after a stellar career of almost 4 decades in Garda Síochána, and a native of County Clare. She moved from Clare to Coolock to Cambodia, where she spent a period of time, all the seas in the UN for a period of time, and spent also a significant period of time in Limerick. And when I asked the Policing Authority and the Executive for some thoughts on Anne-Marie's service, what they recorded to me was someone who they considered, and certainly I consider, who is calm and considered. She has an immense loyalty to the organisation and a deep and sincere belief in the good that Garda Síochána can deliver to the public. She's very much invested in the principle of Garda Síochána as a community police service, and all of us can tribute her great sense of humour and kindness, and a great deep sense of pride that she has in serving Garda Síochána, and her conviction in the organisation's capacity to serve the most vulnerable in society was also very much particularly evident. And she is certainly a person of great integrity and tenacity, and we as an authority since our existence have been very happy that she has been on the opposite side to us, for good and bad, in our exchanges. And it sounds like I'm reading an obituary, but I know that she has great plans in her retirement, and I don't know if you could describe her plans in retirement as retirement, but she, I'm sure, will be very active after she leaves Garda Síochána. So the Policing Authority very much wishes to record its thanks to the Deputy Commissioner for her service to the policing and to the Irish public. I now wish to turn to Mr. Anthony Harbison, who is going to talk on conduct and discipline.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, just in terms of suspensions, there's a public narrative that members are suspended for matters that might be deemed insignificant, or that there's a rush to suspend following allegations of misconduct. Can you set out broadly, without getting into any individual cases, because I know you can't, the categories of behaviour for which members are currently suspended?
Well, in the first place, it has to be said that suspension is very carefully considered, both at a local level and then at a headquarters level. It is subject to review, and the behaviour which may lead to suspension is of the most serious in terms of the gravity of the allegations that might be made against a member. The recent pattern has been of behaviour which isn't actually been on duty, but off duty. And again, I have to regret to report that it has involved allegations in respect of domestic abuse, coercive control, assault, allegations around serious sexual assault, but also allegations then around driving under the influence, particularly then when there's been further aggravating factors, and that might have been in terms of a road traffic collision or indeed behaviour towards the member who was actually dealing with the particular incident. So just the emphasis I'd wish to place on this is that we do regard this as a very serious and grave step in terms of an individual, and we're very aware of the impact it will have upon the individual, but also then we have to take into consideration the seriousness of the allegation, as I said, but also then public confidence in Garda Síochána. For some who don't obviously meet that threshold, but where there is an allegation made, some of those are dealt with then by individual members being placed in a public-facing role, but still carry on in terms of performing duty. But if I might just turn to John quickly, is there anything more, John, you wish to say? Just maybe in respect of the review process that you undertake, John.
Yeah, good afternoon. So yes, I mean, all suspensions are closely considered at the time of the instigation of a suspension. There's a range of criteria set out in the suspension policy at which the alleged actions are considered against, and that is then subject to a formal quarterly review by myself on behalf of the Commissioner, and overseen by Deputy Commissioner Coxon then once a quarter also. And but as well as that, then any member can bring forward any facts during the course of the suspended period, and indeed then if there's any change in the investigation or significant developments, that would also be considered as a matter of course. It's probably worth highlighting too then that there is an improving picture in terms of the amount of overall suspensions. So in 2023 then there was a 40% reduction in the amount of members' new suspensions compared to 2022. We currently have 99 members suspended, and that is the lowest that it has been for almost 2 years. There have been no new suspensions in the calendar year of 2024, and we also had a 70% increase in the amount of suspensions coming to an end during 2023 compared to 2022, and a 36% reduction in the amount of overall discipline files being managed in the organisation in 2023 compared to 2020. So there is an improving picture and less of a requirement in the last 18 months or so to introduce suspensions than there has been previously.
Thank you for that. It's good to see it, and hopefully that's based on better performance and better work rather than less oversight, if you take my meaning. Back in November of last year, we briefly touched on a circulation of inappropriate WhatsApp messages that were going around. I was wondering, Commissioner, if you could give us an update on any actions that you've taken since then.
Well, at the time, we did put out a very cautionary message to the organisation, just in respect of those individuals who were, in effect, spreading false, scurrilous rumours around individual members. Individual female members, I have to say, like, it was directed only towards female members of the organisation. That seems to have had the desired effect. I know for a fact then that WhatsApp groups then went very quiet or disappeared altogether. And since then, we've had no reoccurrence. We're very aware then that it did happen, it might happen again, and then we'd obviously want to be in a position to take proactive action. And that would include then support for the individual members who are targeted by this. But like, we've zero tolerance for the abuse of individuals online or via WhatsApp messages, and we made that very clear. And I think then in turn the organisation, our members within the organisation and those outside the organisation as well, can see that we're serious about this, and we weren't going to stand idly by. The investigation of it, it proves difficult because it probably did not cross, and couldn't see that it crossed the criminal threshold sufficient then to be seeking mobile phones under warrant then for examination, and that in part then would preclude discipline action. But at the same time, I'm pleased to report we've had no further incidents, and we just want to be sure that that doesn't happen again.
Well, it's good to hear at least there's no reputation. Can we move on maybe to a couple of matters we've already discussed in previous meetings, and just to get some updates there? So can I ask you perhaps what the impact of the anti-corruption unit is in terms of supporting appropriate behaviours?
My turn to John, please. John.
Yeah, so the anti-corruption unit has a number of different sections then. The investigative section currently have approximately 20 live investigations into alleged corrupt behaviour by members, and those are at various stages. Some DPP directions have been received to prosecute. Some are awaiting DPP, are still being considered by the DPP and awaiting a direction, and some are at the investigative stage. Anti-corruption unit then has also commenced drug testing in respect of members of the public who are applying to join Garda Síochána, so that's currently active and taking place. And as well as that then, there is, in terms of addressing behaviours, there is an anti-corruption unit integrity programme which is ongoing and delivered across the organisation. By way of example then, delivered briefings to 6 inspector development courses during Q4 of 2023, as well as briefings to other promotion courses and training events. And there are regular integrity themes meetings held then between anti-corruption unit and internal affairs, who manage discipline across the organisation. And those meetings identify trends and behavioural themes, which allows to inform the nature of the briefings. Last year as well then, 4 Learning the Lessons newsletters were published across the organisation as a result of addressing those themes. Those themes being, for 2023, the inappropriate use of Garda systems, abuse of authority for sexual purposes, criminal conduct, and the acceptance of gifts and hospitality and sponsorship. We continue then as well to consider our position in respect of in-career vetting, and policies and procedures remain in the drawing up stage with a view to introducing that in the future.
That's great. I think that is very positive actions going forward. But in terms of the actual impact it's having, do you have any assessment or measures in terms of the actual impact on behaviours? You mentioned themes and behaviour, so I'm just wondering how you're actually measuring the impact of all of that work.
Well, I think it's very difficult to measure in a pure quantifiable way. As I alluded to in the earlier answer, we are seeing less requirement to suspend members in recent times, and that those suspensions would be for serious allegations around corruption. We also are aware of a growing decrease in complaints, both our own complaints and those complaints submitted to GSOC. So whilst there's no firm data to rely on, the indications are of a slowly improving pattern of behaviour, and difficult to quantify exactly.
You mentioned the pre-employment checks, drug checking that was going on. What about the time frame for the introduction of drug testing just generally across the organisation?
So it still very much remains the ambition of the Commissioner and Garda Síochána to introduce drug testing, and we still await regulations. The organisation continue to prepare for those regulations being available to us in terms of our policy and procedures and how we would actually do that in practice. There is no firm timescale for the regulations currently.
And what about in career vetting or vetting in?
Anti-corruption unit does suffer from not having the full allocation of resource that we would require in order to implement that fully, but it remains under the development of policy and procedure stage at this time.
Thank you. If I can turn maybe to AC Willis and AC Cleary, between DMR and the Eastern
regions, what we do at the senior leadership level is that we would start, for example, with our own regional management meetings, and we have a recurring agenda item of performance and standards on that. So that will cascade down to amongst our members every day. For example, 2 weeks ago, I personally attended an accommodation award ceremony in Wicklow Division, where we handed out over 150 commendations for excellent police work. But an important part of those awards committees are not just to acknowledge good police work for example, a seizure of guns or drugs. It's to ensure that the way in which the members did our business in seizing those drugs and guns complied with our code of ethics and our policies and procedures. So, you know, we push the personal responsibility on our individual members as well when it comes to good behaviour. And that starts with day one, when you take the oath and declaration, and then our code sets out responsibilities, and then there's a legal framework there under the Garda Síochána Act with our policing principles. As I said, we had our code of ethics, and we have our Garda decision-making model, and our human rights strategy. So we then have our different layers of supervision and management across the regions, and they in turn will ensure that the standards are met. And I have to say that our members perform to the highest standards, the vast majority of them, in what is a very challenging and demanding role. And it's only on the rare occasion that we have to resort to either discipline or other sanctions. So I think we take it very seriously, and it's something we do personally at the highest level. For example, in my region, I recently had assigned a new chief superintendent, and I spent a full day's induction setting out my stall as to the high standard expected. So, and similarly, when I do my district inspections, last week I was in Waterford and in Dungarvan. So we're all the time leading by example and being vocal about the high standards that we expect.
Thank you. AC Willis, do you want to comment?
Thank you. So very, very similar to my colleague. The exact same structures apply in my region, and I suppose I would like to acknowledge the outstanding performance that members right across the country perform on a daily basis in a very challenging environment many times. The outcomes achieved and the arrests and the prosecutions are an example of the very high professionalism, the very high level of commitment that people have in our organisation to keeping people safe. And I suppose from my particular perspective, what I like to do is encourage people to speak up and support them when people do actually speak up, and give them that confidence and courage, because that spreads very clearly across the organisation. If people are speaking up and nothing is happening, well then that discourages people, whereas from our perspective, and I know it's the same in the Eastern region and across all of the regions in fact, that when people do have that courage to speak up and when there is wrongdoing, that they're supported and that we get to the bottom of whatever that particular issue is. I suppose another thing that we do is we try to champion visible leaders at all levels, and like Paul has said, you know, we have our management structures and our governance structures right from the top right down, and taken every opportunity, even at briefings. I attend many briefings where there are major events across the city. I reinforce that message at every opportunity when there are large numbers in the room, as does the senior management team then, from the chief super, the superintendent, the inspector, whoever is providing the briefing. So that constant reinforcement and role modelling of what the expected standards are. And then we have our policies and procedures. We're a human rights-based, a human rights-focused organisation. So everything we do is on the basis that it's legal, it's proportionate, it's necessary. And then constantly reinforcing that around supporting people with the Garda decision-making model. Oftentimes our members are forced to make decisions in very volatile situations. That can be incidents happening that are very stressful, and yet there is a decision required. So the decision-making model supports them in that, you know, constantly reflecting on, is this the right thing to do? What are my options? Are there other options? So I suppose it's a combination of making sure that we support our members, we train them, we resource them, and then we give them that guidance and that leadership and that supervision that's required to enable them to fulfil their functions. But again, I would like to re-emphasise that the vast majority of our members, they react exemplary on a daily basis, and they show courage and restraint and resilience in a very challenging environment a lot of the time.
No, I would agree. I think we all recognise that the very vast majority of all of the Garda Síochána work at the top standards as you could expect in any police service. But it only takes a couple of rotten apples to really spoil a barrel, and certainly the media pick upon that. So what I was really trying to get at was, are you happy that throughout the organisations that you're both leading, that the message is there, there's not just top management dedication and approach to this, that it has filtered through all of the levels, and that people do feel the courage to speak up, that they do feel the ability to actually call out bad behaviour, whether it's the code of ethics or personal interactions with each other?
I'm absolutely satisfied. In a previous role, I was head of bureau at the Garda National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and in that role I had responsibility for investigating matters that required investigating at a very high level, and those investigations arose as a consequence of people speaking up and having that courage. So I am satisfied that people have that courage, and that they know that we are taking it serious. And if we take it serious at the top, then that filters down very quickly, and that there are consequences for inappropriate and poor behaviour, and anything that's more than a service level complaint is taken with the seriousness that it deserves, and that's borne out by the reduction then in the complaints that we see. And
there have been suspensions for bad behaviour, and there have been convictions for bad behaviour. Do those behaviours surprise you?
I suppose more than surprising me, they disappoint me. That we would have to deal with those kinds of behaviours. But yeah, it's more of a disappointment than a surprise, I suppose.
AC Cleary?
Yeah, similar. We invest a lot of energy and effort into being fairly visible in the standards we expect from our members in our regions. When, on the rare occasion, we do come across incidents of bad behaviour, we react quickly and robustly, and we leave people in no doubt as to how we feel about those type of incidents. So yeah.
So some of the discussion here today have been very much focused on the systems that have been in place to address the bad behaviour when it arises. But how confident are you, AC Cleary, when you look at the guards and sergeants and other ranks that you look after in your region, that they are behaving ethically?
As I mentioned earlier, with the structure, systems and processes we have in place, I'm satisfied that we will be able to capture bad behaviour in most of those occasions where it may occur. In saying that, we don't have a magic wand, and there are going to be incidents that we miss, but it is important that we do react swiftly to those and deal with them appropriately.
and AC Willis.
Yeah, very similar from me, Chair, in relation to that. And I suppose policing is a human endeavour, so there will be mistakes made. And I am absolutely satisfied that the systems are there to catch that and to catch it at all of the levels up along.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Helen Hall has some questions.
I just really have one, and it's probably for both of you again, but in relation to what we heard report, say, last year on what we heard from communities, and particularly again when we had the meeting in Dublin around the behaviour of certain, Garda members in terms of young people. I suppose some of this isn't at the criminal level, it's more around the tone and about the way things might happen. And I just wonder, have you thought about that since, and is there anything that you've done since in relation to making sure that everyone's on the same page that you're declaring? You're saying, you want a certain standard of behaviour, you want it to be, so I suppose really that's it. Has that resonated with you, and whether there's anything you have done or anything you could do? And I suppose the offer, that we had made to brief you in more detail on that report remains. I know it's been you haven't been able to be available for that, but that offer still stands to give you a little bit more insight into that, what we heard from communities.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful to understand a bit more the context in which those comments were made, because certainly I think that was some engagement down in the northeast inner city, where we have significant effort put into the local community down there. And we know obviously that performance and standards are key to maintaining trust with local communities. I suppose on another aspect of that, we know in the last public attitude survey that young people actually had a high trust rate, and it's up to 90%, I understand. So that's where I'm sort of wondering where that gap is. But certainly I think some further engagement might be useful, because we, as I said, we put a lot of effort in through our community policing teams. We have the North East Inner City Initiative down there. We have a community safety partnership. So we have multiple engagements on a daily basis with and it's a very diverse community in that area. But we put a lot of effort into our diversity officers and ensuring that we understand the different requirements that different communities might have from us, and making sure that our members are aware of the different dynamics that might exist, and that those different perceptions that might arise as a consequence of interactions. So certainly very happy to engage further, and but I do want to say that we put a lot of effort into making sure that we can reach into those communities and get a better understanding of what their individual needs are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So Mr. Paul Meehan is going to speak now to the implementation of the CAD 99 recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, just a few questions really on the latest report from Derek Penman, who you'll recall was asked by the authority to look at the fallout, if you like, from the CAD 999 issue and to make recommendations as to how public confidence in that system, if you like, could be restored. And the authority, I think, is pleased to note that in terms of the 16 recommendations that were made by Mr. Penman in his earlier report, that 12 of those are now implemented and that a number of others are being progressed. I just wondered if you could tell us, are you now satisfied that the system as it currently is working safely and properly?
Well, before I might turn to AC Cleary, who, in fairness, has overseen as a project the full rollout of Garda Safe, which is our new command and control system, all across Ireland, but also then has been intimately involved in policy formulation, which has then driven the practices within Garda Safe and ultimately then within the control rooms. But I'd also note then from the Penman report that we're in early days of Garda Safe. There is learning from us and just in its practical application and how it's working. Mr. Penman makes reference to supervision levels and staffing levels, and then also then further technological improvements around people still calling stations, local stations for resolution or of a local, maybe less urgent issue. So there's still work to be done, but Garda Safe was built on the knowledge of what had happened in terms of the cancelled 999 calls, but also then on the basis of the first Penman report and the feedback then we got throughout that process. So that put us in a strong place when there was such a, really clear focus on all of this. That put us into a strong place, and obviously Mr. Penman brought his expertise as well. If I might turn then to Paul just around the day-to-day operation of it, and just then the organisational assurance we have from that operation then, please, Paul.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. So I suppose going back, it was our own internal review in 2020 that highlighted this issue, and then the findings of our own review and the findings of Mr. Penman resulted in us changing, rebuilding the Garda organisation's call handling and dispatch function. And we spent the last 3 years doing a lot of work in 4 main areas, and I'll just give you a quick outline of the changes we made before I tell you how the impact it's had. Firstly, new policy and procedures for the organisation, and I'm happy to say that this week we finally released our new call handling and incident response policy and procedures by way of HQ Directive 16 of 24. The new policy and procedures are comprehensive and define clear roles and responsibilities for governance and performance assurance. I had given Mr. Penman sight of the policy in advance of it being released, and he said in his final report to the Policing Authority, he said the new policy and procedures are comprehensive and address policy gaps. They significantly strengthen supervision control centres, and we've also reached our optimum goal for call operatives in 3 of the 4 regional control centres. We have a slight deficit of 7.5 in the DMR, which will be satisfied at the end of April. So we will be at optimum level then, and so much so that in Galway and the Eastern region we have started redeploying sworn members who were brought in there temporarily in the last couple of years. So the resourcing has worked well to date. The next area then of significant improvement is the launch of the Garda Safe, as the Commissioner has outlined. That's our computer-aided dispatch system, which replaces our old 1980s CAD system. And the new Garda Safe system has been launched in all 4 regional control centres and will provide enhanced victim response, as it's now a national inter-regional system where all calls are risk assessed, vulnerability can be identified. For example, repeat callers will show up, addresses will show up. All calls are recorded. We have visibility of both incidents and units on the map screen, and we can dispatch not only the closest unit necessarily, but the best equipped and trained unit to respond to the call. We also have Pulse and SIS integration with Garda Safe, so we can immediately see alerts, warrants, court orders, firearms, information, intelligence and that. So from an organisational point of view, we have better data consistency and quality and a more efficient use of resources. And in the last area where we have made significant progress is in the implementation of the recommendations made by Mr. Derek Penman in his report to the Policing Authority. And as you said, Mr. Penman made 16 recommendations, 15 from Garda Síochána and 1 for the Department of Justice around the Police and Community Safety Authority. Of the 15 AGS recommendations, we put a lot of work into the implementation, and to date we have implemented fully 12 of the 15 recommendations, with recommendation 1 being deemed by Mr. Penman as partially implemented. And I'm hoping with the new policy and procedures being released and bedding down with the dip sampling that we can be discharged of that in the short to medium term. Recommendations 8 and 15 were deemed not implemented. Recommendation 8 refers to the definition of adverse impact, and we had provided our definition, which we believe is appropriate to us as law enforcement working within a legal framework. This wasn't accepted by the Policing Authority, and we have previously agreed that we would meet separately on this issue, and it hasn't happened of yet, but I do hope it will happen soon. And then recommendation 15 was also deemed not implemented, and refers to the access to the control room calls by the policing authority. We had concerns about that one and have referred the matter to the Data Protection Commissioner and sought further legal advice. So I suppose overall we have made fundamental changes to how we do our business in this area. We have reflected and learned from previous shortcomings, and we will continue to improve. I will carry out a review of the new policy within 12 months, and I've also set up a governance and performance management group at 2 levels. One made up of the RCC managers, which will meet monthly to ensure consistency across the country, and in matters of policy they can escalate it up to the next level, which will be chaired by me quarterly, and the regional operational superintendents where they affect policy, or if I need to escalate them up to the SLT or the executive. So it's that continuous improvement piece and knowing what's going on with all the issues as they arise so we can deal with them.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very comprehensive and preempted a number of the other questions that I was going to have. But I do wonder, and it may be that the system that you've just described will be the answer to this, but clearly a huge amount of work has been done, and it's a matter of critical public confidence, and we all want people to be able to pick up the phone in confidence and to phone the guards in appropriate circumstances. Most systems are only really as good as the individuals who are handling them. And I just wonder, is the system that you've just described sufficient to give yourselves reassurance that if an individual falls down in the job again, that will be caught quickly? Because clearly, given the nature of some of these calls, that is absolutely critical for yourselves.
I think the training that's accompanying the launch of Garda Safe is extensive, but also the policy and procedures sets out very clearly the roles and responsibilities of everybody involved in the call management and dispatch. Calls are escalated as necessary according to their categorisation, and we can see, and I'm happy to show the policing authority how it works in real time. It does escalate those incidents that need to be escalated. Is there potential for human error? I think in every aspect of everything we do, there's always that chance of human error. So we just have to make sure. I think that increase in supervision and inspectors is going to go a long way towards improving any potential risks in that area. So, as I said, we've recently doubled the number of sergeants and inspectors. We've also made an application for an increase in the ECF for a superintendent in every control room. So all of those measures, as I said, with the continuous improvement going forward, will reduce the risk of any human error. But I think the system itself is far and away better than the one we had previously had.
Okay. And just on the staffing issue and the sort of resourcing model, I think previously, Commissioner, you had indicated, and maybe Assistant Commissioner as well, that obviously it stands to sense that there are certain areas in the country that command much more in terms of emergency calls than others. I think at one stage, Commissioner, you may have said that one area in Dublin in one 24-hour period had more calls than the rest of the country put together. How does that feed into your allocation of resources?
Well, the main thing is that we have that inter-regional functionality. So in other words, for example, if you look since the launch of Garda Safe in the Dublin region in November, we have also had what we call an overflow desk in Galway. So where calls are not answered within a short space of time, they'll go down to the Galway desk and be answered and dealt with. They'll go back to the dispatcher in Dublin, but that's all done in seconds. So we do have that capability we can go to any control room if there is an increase in the number of calls in, say, for example, a particular district or division in the DMR. They can help each other out.
So there's no risk of one area being overwhelmed?
Only if the people on the ground don't have enough cars or people out to deal with the number of calls that's coming in. But from the control room,
which is the operational side,
which is the operational side.
Different from.
But I'm happy enough. When you look at the numbers we've put into the control centres over the last, particularly in the last 6 to 8 months, the capacity is there.
Yeah.
To deal with the call.
And you did mention the adverse impact issue, and you're right that I think we had some misgivings around your proposed definition, and hopefully there will be a meeting to discuss that. We won't get into the detail necessarily of that here. And in terms of the other thing I just wanted to mention, to put on the public record as well, is that while significant progress clearly has been made in the preface to his new report, there are some comments from Mr Penman around the issue that you mentioned as well, which was really access to live calls. And I think the Garda position was that you had some legal misgivings around that, which did then prevent Mr Penman from accessing live calls and from providing that degree of reassurance. I think that is something that we're probably going to revisit with you, because in order to test this system independently, I think from our perspective we want to get either Mr Penman or someone else to come back in and to do that at a future date. So we'll probably continue that conversation with you. But I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that aspect in particular at the moment. I presume the position.
I think we still await advice from the DPC, and then when we receive that, then we can have further conversation in respect of that.
Yeah.
Just then the practical outworkings of that are of concern, but we'll have further conversation when we get a response from Data Protection Commissioner, see the clarity that provides. And then we can have further conversation then around the practical outworking of this.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Just a quick follow-up question, Commissioner, in relation to the operational end of things. Is it fair to say that you have a district or some districts that would be busier than all of the districts at times combined in Ireland?
Well, it is true that some of the DMR districts, particularly, and it may just be a one-off, but certainly one district in DMR was outweighing all of the other districts put together at a stage. But
in the country,
it's well known that DMR West, DMR North are very, very busy districts, and there's always huge demand on Garda and Garda resources in those divisions. But then beyond that, then the good thing about RDMS is that it's given us far more management information about where the work is, because all of it is coming through the Garda Safe system. Sorry, the Garda Safe system has given us far more information, and the RDMS system now that's fully rolled out gives us far greater insight as to where our people are. So there's a point then of marrying just those two sets of information around where we assign Garda members to against what workload. So that management information has really just come together in the last couple of months, and I know it's informed Paul and the other regional commanders around deployment. So, sorry, Paul, you want that?
Yeah, just as well, we've recently launched a management tool. It's called a Cabana dashboard, and that's available to managers in those busy districts, and it tells them exactly who they have, where they are, what amount of calls are outstanding, and the feedback we're getting is that is a very useful tool from them from a deployment aspect.
I think the public will be surprised that at times in any given night there is a district in Dublin that is busier with calls than all of the districts in the country combined together. It's just the nature of the policing required, the nature of resources that are required. AC Willis, do you have any comment on that? Because I believe it comes that those regions come under your purview.
Yeah, Chair, that division is mine in the DMR West, and that district is within the DMR West division. And there was an occasion where there were more calls to that division or requiring a response in that division than there were in the rest of the city and the rest of the country combined. So that is a challenge. It's a challenge for the members out there that are responding, and obviously then we deal with calls on a basis of priority. But that's the reality, and I suppose the reality is as well that in 2023 the DMR dealt with 48% of all calls across the 4 regions. So that's just the reality of the DMR.
Thank you very much, AC Willis. So I'm going to turn now to Dr. Jane McCahey, who's going to speak on policing performance.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see you all. Commissioner, if we could talk a little bit about policing performance in 2023, could you identify a few successes that you'd like to highlight or things that you're particularly proud of from last year, please?
Yes, more than a few maybe, but well, we've touched upon Garda Safe and its deployment, touched upon RDMS and its completed deployment. End-to-end recruitment services contract, which that's very important, particularly around bringing Garda staff into the organisation. The removal of the Central Statistics Office reservation, which was a whole of an organisational effort, but very capably led by Mr. Andrew O'Sullivan here with us. We completed then also the domestic abuse risk assessment tool rollout right across the country. And then further expansion of health and wellbeing supports to all our personnel, and that includes the commencement of organisation-wide mental health first aid training, and that is a first for any policing organisation actually in Europe. So we are proud of that, and that will make progress this year. There's been, beyond the systems we've already talked about, ongoing delivery and integration of new ICT systems. We've commenced the body-worn camera procurement process that commenced last year, and I know we'll talk about that later as well. And also then, we had a very difficult end of year with the public disorder, serious public disorder on the 23rd of November. AC clearly delivered a public order debrief in the year within about 3 weeks, which is very comprehensive. We only have forwarded that to you this week. But that will inform then AC Hillman's public order review, which is ongoing. Last year, now a total of, and it's over a number of years, but now we have a total of 3,000 members or staff who have completed on their own time the Human Rights in Policing diploma. So it's very positive about the organisation, I believe. And also then operationally, beyond all the operational successes, in behind that, there's been increased traction of our Garda liaison officer network, both into Europe, but then further afield in the Americas, but also now in the Middle East, and that's been very positive. We had a very successful deployment of personnel to the Rugby World Cup, and indeed then we're examining assistance that we can provide to the Olympics this summer. And then I just, like, as has already been stated, it's just ongoing, and it is a privilege in my position to see all the work that's happening and the in-depth investigations that are ongoing and the superb responses that there is at a local level to many difficult incidents, and that is generally the theme, like, of the vast majority of the great work that's been done by Garda members across a huge array of disciplines around a huge range of different types of incidents, dealing both with existing crime types and also emerging crime types, and working with and supporting victims. So despite all of the challenges, and there was many challenges last year, I think the organisation really rose to that challenge and did achieve a lot in 2023, and we look forward then to 2024 and the challenges obviously there is within that year as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, you've plenty to be proud of there for sure. Is there one or two things of those that you think are particularly significant in terms of maybe cultural change, or are they all equally important?
Well, just in terms of, I think, behaviours and attitudes in the organisation, I would point to the rollout of the mental health first aid training. So, and we're in the process now of training the trainers. They will soon graduate, and then they will be rolling out that training at a local level. It's something picked up in your own commentary and what we heard, but also very clear to us that we want to reduce the stigma around people having a mental health concern. Huge pressure on both members and staff, a lot of it driven by the external factors outside of Garda Síochána, but also we're an organisation going through a lot of change. There's a lot of focus on it, and people do feel the stress and pressure of that. So we do want to make sure we've got the mental health first aid packages there, together with the other health and wellbeing supports that we have for both Garda members and Garda staff. And also, I would highlight the response of the organisation on the 23rd of November to the serious disorder following the attack in the early afternoon. And there was a magnificent response by everyone in the organisation who could lend a hand, did come to the assistance, either within DMR or from outside DMR, Dublin Metropolitan Region. And I think that was really an exemplar of the behaviour of the organisation in terms of seeing a need and respond to it with great flexibility and adaptability, and then when they were there with great courage and fortitude. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And just to kind of follow up a little bit more on that point about the riot and public order policing, will you be bringing any particular learning from that event in particular, or even over the course of policing public order events and public protests over last year into this year? Perhaps.
Well, I would say there is learning throughout the year, and certainly you can see that in terms of the profile in DMR around the number of members who were trained in public order response, and then the deployment of public order units on a daily basis in DMR as well. And so there was a preparedness there, and part of that was driven then by our own strategic threat and risk analysis around public order. The learning from the night of the 23rd of November, but also then from previous incidents in 2023, will drive AC Hillman's public order review, and a lot of that's already in train, and obviously we can report further to that. But I think maybe appropriate turn practically then to AC Willis about just the response in DMR over 2023 to a very evolving and dynamic situation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. So in 2022, we had 307 protests recorded across the DMR for the whole year. And in 2023, we saw that increase to 617 protests. And I suppose that gradually arose from the beginning of the year. Some quite challenging incidents for our members to deal with, because we not only just had protest activity, but then we had counter-protest activity as well. And our members were the ones holding the line, if you like, in the middle of the two, trying to keep them apart and uphold everybody's right to peaceful assembly. In the course of 2023, we arrested 54 people in the course of that protest activity, and to date this year we have had 107 protests where we've had to provide a policing response, and in the course of those we've made 15 arrests so far this year, but the trend is actually downwards. So, and this time last year we had more protests dealt with than we have at this stage, so we see it trending downwards, but still a quite challenging environment. And the Commissioner alluded to some lessons learned from the 23rd of November. So again, we have some other significant events that will arise this year that we are further preparing for now at this point in terms of training and equipment that will be deployed to the members. But we continue to have a human rights approach, a graduated response approach to protest activity, and we will make arrests at an appropriate time where criminal activity is undertaken.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Dr. Donald Butler.
Thanks, Chairman. Just looking at 2024, while the policing plan was being drawn up, there were a lot of developments, the protests, increased level of protests, the demand for increased visibility of policing in Dublin City, the Christmas Eve shooting, all the issues that arise from the level of immigration in the country. All these are extra demands which demand more resources. Or I suppose the question is, how are you coping with all these demands given the constraints you have on resources? And what are the challenges you're facing in actually trying to balance all this stuff?
Well, the challenge overall, I'd say, in the organisation is just, as you say, the extent of new things emerging, but also then other issues are still with us. So last year, a terrible amount of casualties there was on the road, including those who died in road traffic collisions. So that's in effect another more historic problem, which has just re-emerged as well. And I think that together with the senior leadership team, we have to prioritise then where we put resources, what training then we do to make sure people are sufficiently equipped for the challenges they face. But the other side of that is then that Garda members at all levels are working very hard, putting long hours in, and particularly into the autumn and over the winter. There's very long hours put in, and even in the early part of the year, while dealing with the protests, we also had the privilege of policing and securing the visit of President Biden. So the big demands placed on the organisation throughout the year in 2023. At the same time, new people have arrived in that the first of the classes have graduated from the college, and that makes a big difference in terms of people arriving, and then that allows for some lateral development, people to move into more specialist sections, and also then stations to be bolstered with additional resources. So that's on the positive side of that, but we are short of the resources that actually we need, and that's well documented. We are obviously then going through our recruitment processes, but we've also then looked at both our recruitment and retention policy. We have ongoing meetings then with the associations with what might be done. But resources and how we use our resources, and actually making sure then that those resources are well looked after and trained and equipped for the role that they're in, are ongoing issues and really like primary concerns really of ours as a senior leadership team.
Okay, just on the resources, there are two things that strike me. One is the if you could get an agreement on the rostering. I've seen numbers. This would be equivalent to giving you 550 extra members. Just where that is, and also if you could say something about the recruitment campaign that's just been in progress. What's your initial assessment of that?
So if I touch briefly on the rosters, I understand that the rosters negotiations in effect have finished this week. There might be some further tidying to do, but I think we've got to a position where those roster negotiations have almost concluded, and then hopefully we've got an agreed position then that the associations are able then to take to their membership. In respect then of the recruitment competition that finished on the 8th of February, 6,300 applicants, very positive response, particularly positive response from those in the age bracket 35 to 49, in that a third of those were of that age group. So that was very positive itself. But if I might turn to Yvonne just on, because we still have good numbers who've come through the PAS process and their names have been passed over to us for our processes, which are the fitness, the medical, and the vetting and the drug testing. But then this is a new batch as well. So if Yvonne, have you got those figures, please?
Thanks, Commissioner. So we were delighted with the outcome to this most recent campaign, and actually I think that was testament to a whole organisational approach in terms of each of the assistant commissioners under Garda trainee recruitment outreach group actively worked within their own areas to identify opportunities to reach into communities, to promote the competition itself. And then also from learning from our last campaign as well, we enhanced our social media outreach and also paper outreach as well in terms of the newspapers. So with respect to that competition, that was an important one for us in terms of the timing of it. We still are processing previous competitions, as the Commissioner has alluded to, but the one risk facing us was we would run short before another campaign had delivered, and I would be very confident to say, looking at our numbers, that won't happen. We are confident that we will continue to have a fluid pipeline into the organisation. What we have been doing is a few things just to ensure that that moves as quickly as is possible. We do have capacity within the college, so what we want to be doing is drawing through an optimum number each time we bring in intakes into Templemore. So there's a few things we have been working on. First and foremost, with the Public Appointments Service, they've been supporting us with reducing their timeline for their competition. We do know from the evidence base, the longer people are in competitions, the more likely we are to see attrition or fallout, and that's where people have other opportunities and maybe more expeditious recruitment processes. So PAS have been doing that for us. Secondly, what we have also been doing is the same with respect to the Commissioner has referred to. After individuals progress through the PAS elements of the process, they then move into the Garda Síochána elements, which include physical competence, drug testing, medical, local vettings, to name but a few. So what we are currently working on is looking at running a number of those stages in tandem, which is, again, important. And then lastly, we have been looking at ongoing and active engagement with the candidate group whilst they're moving through the process. Some learnings with respect to some challenges people had with regards to the physical competence assessment. You may have seen recently in the media, we brought in the media to test it out, and that was, I would say, largely successful in terms of their pass rates, but also just signalling that if you prepare, it is wholly achievable. So we will continue to do as much as we can to where people do meet the standard, and there is rightfully a standard to move through that particular process. And we would envisage going forward that it is likely that we will have an annual competition, bearing in mind our forecasting work and the numbers we need to see coming into the organisation.
Thanks very much. Just one, that's fine. One last one on, there's a fair bit of concern about arson attacks around the country. Is there anything you could say about that?
Well, before I turn to AC Willis, it's just to highlight there is a national approach to this now. So these are obviously localised incidents. Local investigations are conducted. We take these investigations very seriously. The SIO is appointed, incident room, incident coordination, and all of our investigative tools are brought to bear on these investigations. And indeed, actually, in the last number of weeks, we've looked back at previous incidents as well to see if there's further investigative opportunities to pursue. But also just at a national level, Special Detective Unit have a national investigation which seeks then to draw on any threads there is around commonality in respect of modus operandi, but also in respect of any of the individuals who might be engaged in such activity. So we have both a local response but also a national response, and obviously then as well a national intelligence gathering response. So all of these things are going on, and I would say as well, not directly parallel but a close cousin, the amount of abuse there is of politicians, which meets a criminal threshold, is also subject then to a national investigation, again led by SDU. So there is a national approach to this, and there's a national strategy in respect of it. If I might turn then to AC Willis just in terms of recent incidents in DMR. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. I suppose what I just want to add to what the Commissioner has said there, that is, arson is a really serious offence. It presents significant risk to life, because even where premises might appear to be unoccupied and being prepared for occupation at a later time, there may be people inside there, and where a fire is set, there is an immediate risk to life. For any occupant, there might be a security personnel or whatever inside asleep, and may not be alerted to the fact that the premise is on fire. So there is a huge risk. The penalty for arson is life imprisonment, criminal damage by fire. So just to say that, I think, is important. In terms of some of the challenges in the DMR is misinformation online. So, you know, the instant circulation of information that sometimes can be absolutely inaccurate. We have had a premises burned where there was a suggestion online that it was linked to accommodation for a particular group of people. That was not the case. The premises was burnt. And in fact, in relation to that particular incident, while not getting into it, we have a suspect identified, and a file is currently with the DPP, as are other files in relation to other incidents of arsons. We have 4 files currently with the DPP. The Commissioner said that a senior investigation officer is appointed in each case. We have done that. We have come together as recently as this week with all of the senior investigating officers in the Dublin region to see if there are any commonalities between the different incidents that have happened in the city, but also across the country. And we're satisfied that these are all localised incidents so far. So I suppose the full rigours of what is available to us in terms of investigative capacity is put to those incidents because they are so serious and because the risk to life is so severe. And we will continue with our investigations and continue to try to identify further suspects and make further arrests. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Chairman, back to you.
Just in relation to the misinformation, I have serious concerns about what's happening online. For the eastern region, we have a couple of examples in the last few weeks there where we saw, for example, some posts online suggesting that a particular property was to be used as an accommodation centre and was subsequently the subject of arson. And there was no such thing. It wasn't the case that it was to be used. But even more worryingly then, in the last week, we had reports circulating online about allegations of an assault on a child, allegedly by males staying in one of these centres, completely untrue, and resulted in, a fairly large protest on that particular centre, with people taking a certain view due to the misinformation circulated online. So, again, we also have investigations underway in relation to those, and we are liaising with the social media platforms.
That's fine. Thank you.
Commissioner A.C. Willis referred to these arson attacks being localised. There may be a perception that there's a national element or an organised element to it. Do you have anything to say on that?
Well, obviously that's been constantly commented upon, and it's the job of the SDU to find those links if they exist. And so we have an open mind, we follow the evidence, we're informed by the intelligence picture, but at this moment in time we've not seen this, in effect, overall conspiracy. And a conspiracy has to be something more than 4 or 5 fire emojis on an X post. So there's lots of posts which are very concerning in terms of their content, but don't breach the criminal threshold there in terms of just what is said. But what we want to be sure of is there a criminal conspiracy, and can we find it from the information that we know? But as we do more investigations, in effect then, as we gain more evidence and more knowledge, then we're in a better place all the time. But we approach this with an open mind. This is an active, in effect, question that's in our mind when we're looking at all of these incidents. Is there any sense then of coordination? And it might even just not be just coordination across the country, but a coordination in a particular region or area, and that's particularly what we want to look for as well. And so that remains very active consideration, but it's not one that we've actually found. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I could turn again to Dr. Jane Mulcahy to talk about the What We Heard report by the Policing Authority.
Thanks very much, Chair and Commissioner. Listening is very important to the work of the Policing Authority, and as part of this, we engage with members of the community and also with Gardaí on the ground. In the report just launched, the What We Heard report, a number of themes came up in the meetings with Gardaí on the ground, including health and well-being of members and staff, management of change, performance management, specialist support capacity in the area of economic and cybercrime in particular, resourcing and recruitment and retention challenges, which have already come up today, organisational approach to training, and a recognition of the lack of a performance management culture and associated impacts on supervision and discipline. We had a conversation in private before Christmas when you had sight of this report, Commissioner, so this isn't the first time that this information has been discussed. What is your response to the issues raised by your members?
Well, first, thank you very much for the feedback provided, and indeed we've had previous conversations about this, and I'd say that it echoes a lot of what we are hearing ourselves within the organisation and responding to as well. If I might turn to the Deputy just to go through what our response has been to this particular report and how we intend to take the work forward then as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So there's 6 areas that you've highlighted, and certainly, as we discussed in December, there are all areas that we were aware of. However, it's always good to see this reflected back and to hear the context in which it's come up so that we can be mindful of that. With every single area that has come up internally, certainly it forms part of what we're looking at for the future. So I can say that in each of these areas, we have a response. So these are all areas that have formed part of our policing plan for this year. Certainly, even as part of the change program, when you look at it going forward, a lot of these things resonate with things that are in train going forward. So I don't know if there's a particular area that you want to speak to, but certainly each and every one of these 6 areas are something that we're working on together as an SLT.
Thank you very much. Well, we discussed in December, one thing that leapt out to me in particular was around change management and change fatigue. As an organisation, you're being confronted with an awful lot of change, some of which is outside of your control. In the report, there was an interesting comment about the policing authority being called upon by some members to translate the reasons for certain decisions. And there is also a perception on the part of some out there, maybe that the policing case for certain changes is not apparent to people or is not being communicated as optimally as it might. So are there some steps that you plan to take in this regard? Are you listening to the concerns of members? Are some of them less, I suppose, valid than others? Are sometimes people complaining or just resistant to change because change can make us all feel a little bit uncomfortable? Is there this disconnect between management and people on the ground, or are you fully aware of the issues that are there?
Well, we work extensively with the associations and unions with respect to the change program, and certainly they've made us aware of these challenges as well. So we've heard it on the ground going out ourselves, and we've also heard it from them. So I would never say that one is more important than the other in terms of how people are feeling. I think people are at different stages, and it may not translate very well depending on who you are, what your role is. Sometimes it's very difficult to see the connect. So, we have a change management office. We have networks across the organization. I would say this is an area we need to continue to work on. We've just approved a bit of a redesign for the strategy and transformation office, and certainly change, and the change management team is part of what we've looked at in that regard. So we know this is an area where we need to not just build more capacity, but continue the work and to do more of it. Because it's that thing of, listening is in the ear of the beholder, right? So you can, even if it's been explained to you, it may not resonate with you, you may not hear it. So given the sheer volume of change in the organization, and we know that we're going to see more of that this year, the work has to continue, and we have to continue to do more and more what we can.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Just one follow-up one. Where systems have changed and have been implemented and people on the ground are then finding actually this as making our life far easier and is far better, is that being communicated to people who have yet to implement that change?
Yeah, so there is cross-learnings. Once a system is implemented in one place, people from that location will go and assist others who are having it come on board new for them. Having said that, it's always, you know, really challenging, and people hear that something, even if they hear that it's working well from people who are using it, they're also going to hear rumors that, we won't be able to implement it here, it'll never work here, that kind of thing. So it's always a challenge to go through a new change like that, but we absolutely leverage the knowledge and expertise of those who've been through the change. And we always update our systems as well. IMS is a good example of this. We know there's been lots of challenges with it, but people who, as you've noted in your report, and we had heard this as well, that people who have it now say they wouldn't go back to what it was before, but they wanted change. And I know the CIO and his team have done a ton of work on implementing that feedback into upgrades to the program. So it's evolving all the time.
Thank you very
Maybe
much.
if I could just add, just in terms of preparing the organisation for change, there's a number of examples, you know, learning from the fact of previous years and feedback. So if we use the example of the operating model rollout, so we've organisational readiness teams that work with each of the divisions in terms of preparedness, and then particularly around the deployment of each division, and then post the division deployment, just so we can take the learnings and make any necessary changes. Similarly, I know the Deputy referenced IMS as well, so we would have engaged with a number of members and staff in relation to IMS over recent months, and we've taken that feedback and applied it in terms of further deployments this year. Thirdly, we have a change management network that has been rolled out across the organisation against a number of themes, and essentially they're advocates and are working with all of the project teams around engaging across the organisation, taking their feedback and applying the learnings to future projects. So while not saying it's perfect, we are definitely listening and applying those learnings to future deployments.
Thank you. I've actually just one more. Just in relation to resourcing and increased visibility, particularly, let's say, in Dublin, has it come up, or are you aware of kind of unease by rank and file Gardaí about having to do more clerical tasks now again because of insufficient other staff to do these roles?
Well, that is a real concern. We have some 900 of our Garda staff who have applied for mobility, so that's, I think, some 27% of our overall complement of Garda staff. So if that is of concern, and Garda staff have been availing of mobility in greater numbers than hitherto. And obviously then that does create then a backfill requirement. And so that's why then we were pleased to announce that we our own clerical officer competition, which had a fantastic actually response in terms of those wishing to work for in Garda Síochána. So as with all these things with resourcing, we're a big organisation. There is a lot of flux in it in any case, but we want to make sure that we're also a growing organisation. And so obviously we are very mindful of that, and mindful that Garda members are properly being used in areas where they can bring value through their skills and experience, and not necessarily then be engaged in work that Garda staff should be undertaking.
Thanks very much.
Commissioner, why are there so many civilian staff on mobility? You mentioned 900, which is the equivalent of, was it 27% of? Why is there so many? Well,
I think it has to be said there's a degree of uncertainty amongst our Garda staff in terms of the new bill and what it'll mean for them in terms of their employment status as they move from being civil servants to public servants, and some change in their terms and conditions and as well. So terms and conditions have still to be negotiated through with the unions, and that's creating a degree, as I say, of uncertainty. And for them, when they look elsewhere then across the civil service, there are vacancies. There are vacancies at all levels, and we do have people who are very experienced and competent individuals and well sought after by other departments. So it's not just administrative staff. We're also losing staff with great expertise, say in the areas of ICT. If I might turn just to Yvonne, just to provide some more further detail, just where we are.
I can
with
do,
the
thanks,
implementation
Commissioner.
of the bill.
So, I mean, to complement what's already been said, first and foremost, what we are being advised is there's uncertainty as to whether colleagues will have access to mobility in the future. So what we're hearing is people are wanting to put themselves on lists to be able to avail of that opportunity in the event that that door would close. So that's number one. Number two, there are many opportunities now unfolding, as the Commissioner. There are some concerns with regards to what the future is going to look like in terms of the terms and conditions. And what we are hearing quite clearly from colleagues is that their status will change from being civil servants in the future to public servants. And there are people who very much so are wedded to their civil service status and want to remain civil servants. So that has been raised as an issue. What we don't want to assume they're just the issues, because there will be other key facets or key factors influencing people's decision to keep mind open really as to what's available to them. And to that end, what we have been doing, the Commissioner referred earlier on to our recruitment and retention strategy. With respect to retention, what we have been actively doing is engaging with staff associations and with the unions. And when we talk about the mobility piece you've specifically asked about, the intention is to further reach in. We've been running focus sessions, listening exercises, and we're going to increase on them to just understand where people are at. And also what we want to do is to move into the new Act, the new bill with positivity. What is it people are saying to us they would want to see in the future available to them in Garda Síochána? So one key element we know we can offer is a job of purpose, a work of purpose. And that's what we're hearing loud and clear. So what more can we do to highlight the varied roles individuals can perform and the key purpose that they can bring to bear? And then also listening to people with respect to other aspects they want considered. So, for example, more flexible working, because that has been highlighted as an issue other departments can provide. So there are a couple of key pieces. But largely, it is about keeping opportunities open. People may not choose to go, but they want to keep that opportunity open to them in case it may be closed in the future is a key thing we're hearing.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cook. Helen?
I just have one follow-up question, if I may. One of the topics that Jane mentioned there was the whole change fatigue and the significant change that the organisation has been under over the past couple of years. You know, the operation model, the new investigation management system, and the RDMS have been mentioned earlier. And I suppose the resources issue really, it's one of the things. If we go back to what we heard, it's that there's not just a change fatigue, there's also fatigue in very busy divisions with, you know, not enough people to go out in the regular and all of that. And I suppose really, in essence, is there anything you'd say that would assure members on the front line that in a year or two, things will be better, be it either resources or the tools that will be at their disposal? Or there's some key things, I suppose, going back to that policing benefit that you think, you know, will make things better for operational policing?
Well, I know we talk about change, but this in effect is continuous improvement, and continuous improvement is productivity, which in part then is freeing up members' time. And I know, well, Andrew probably could speak to the ICT strategy in terms of streamlining procedures, and so we are bringing in systems actually to streamline our procedures and to remove bureaucracy. So maybe even Andrew, just to talk to that before then talk to the resourcing piece.
Sure. So I suppose in the context of continuous improvement and change, one area that probably you don't get too many complaints about are the success of some of those programs, such as, for example, the mobility program. So, for example, the most recent one has been the deployment of the insurance data app to Garda members. So that was started with 150 members around November. Then in January we rolled it out to all 700, and the demand from everybody else in the organisation was phenomenal in terms of roads policing, and the 150 in the alpha stage were telling us they were getting calls from other Garda members to ask them to look something up on their behalf. And what those kind of applications do is that they free Garda members up from having to call back into a station, which could be very busy, over the radio, or indeed to return to the station in order to do their jobs. And of course, it gives them a greater feeling of information-led approaches in their job. It's empowering them literally at the side of the road, in the palm of their hand. they have the entire organisation's knowledge base of the situation that they're dealing with right there and then, and it's under their control about how they do it. So that's very much our objective. As you know, our definition of digitalisation is it's a blending of the electronic and the physical world. So it's not just electronic tools for the sake of it. It's tools then that help Garda members and indeed Garda staff do their jobs more easily. So, and that's very much, you know, the strategy that we have for information-led policing. It's been very successful so far, and I think with a small exception, temporary exception, and I think it was a temporary exception of IMS because the plan was always to, you know, to roll that out on an iterative basis to take on board the feedback, which we've now done, and IMS has now turned into a positive from a kind of a slight negative last year. But I think for all of the other systems, including Garda Safe, and a key aspect of Garda Safe has been the application that goes with it. So Garda members are empowered, you know, from easy things like just getting directions to where they're going, to knowing what's behind the door, as they might put it, when they get there. If there's a domestic abuse incident, if there's a history of assaults on Gardaí, all of this is contributing to member safety and helping them keep people safe. So I think if we can tap into those kind of cultural change aspects as part of changes, then it gets an awful lot easier. But all of those, I think, have been big successes, and as you know, we have a lot more planned as well on that digital roadmap.
That's fine. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one thing I think is really important. We've been in the middle of COVID and a massive change program, and you're talking about big programs. So not only big projects, but actual, you know, the sheer number of them as well. Where the advantages come are when they're fully implemented, because now you have synergies between them, right? Like an op model is a good example right now, where some of the country has transitioned and some hasn't. And then, you know, you have IMS happening as well. You have RDMS and all these other things that are happening. As these things come to the fore, and we're really going to see that throughout this year, that a number of these big projects are going to be concluded. You're going to see synergies between them where instead of it being frustrated because we're halfway through and it's partially implemented, you're going to start to see some big advantages come, and I think that's when some of this realization will be for members on the ground, where they'll get an understanding of it. An example that I give that AC Cleary mentioned just briefly was, you know, the Cabana dashboard, understanding how many people do we have working and what are they doing, and trying to assist people when they need support out there because they're tired and they're busy. So some of these pieces we haven't had to the fore, and so I think, you know, within the next year you're going to see a shift in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner Coxon. I'm just going to turn now to Mr. Anthony Harbison, who will speak about the Garda Síochána Reserve members.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, the authority has raised the issue of the Garda Reserve, and specifically the need for a clear strategy around their recruitment, powers, deployment and training. Now there is a strategy, and we understand there's an intention to commence recruiting. So, Commissioner, can I ask you if you could set out your vision for the role and the place of the Garda Reserve within the organisation, and how you envisage the Garda Reserve contributing to the provision of a policing service?
Well, if I might just turn to Yvonne, please, just to set out the functions and the role of the Garda Reserve as we see it going forward. Obviously, we're very pleased to see Cabinet approval in terms of new regulations and, in effect, a concentration then on recruitment. We'd like to look towards this as a means of attracting those who are underrepresented in the organisation, but also then to focus on other skill areas, including areas such as the Gaeltacht, in terms of recruitment as well. So this gives another route into Garda Síochána as an employer, both for Garda members, for the reserve themselves, but also then perhaps then those who might go on to become Garda staff. So important for us, and if I turn to Yvonne, just what the next practical steps will be here.
Sure, thank you, Commissioner. So I think firstly, we're committed to the Garda Reserve. I'd like to say that firstly. With resourcing being our top organisational risk, it's imperative that we not just look at Garda trainee recruitment and Garda staff recruitment, but the Garda Reserve is also going to be and is already a very important resource available to Garda Síochána. So some of the things we are looking at introducing to make sure it is effective as possible and the individuals concerned feel they're being deployed to their optimum are as follows. First and foremost, the Garda Reserve has moved into my directorate, and that was intentional in terms of ensuring not just with respect to a focus on how we recruit, how we outreach, how we recruit, how we train, but then also how we deploy out into the local areas. So what we have been looking at is active evaluation of how the reserve has and has not worked previously. We've been engaging with the local areas, we've been engaging with those in the reserve to learn some lessons, and some of the lessons learned have equated to the fact that we didn't as closely as possible monitor how active people were. Some people wanted to give more of their time, and also we needed and will need in the future greater consistency as to how people are deployed and to deploy them to their optimum. And what I mean by that is very much so looking at the skills, the experiences that people bring to An Garda Síochána, and then looking at how the reserve can blend and support with the regular guards out on the ground. So with respect to the regulations that the Commissioner has referred to, what we have tried to do is to not be confined as to the discretion and the decision making of the Commissioner as to the powers that will be awarded to the reserve. And they ostensibly at this point in time refer to the Road Traffic Act itself in terms of where they can specifically use powers. But not just in addition to their powers, the reserve can effectively support us in greater visibility, greater community outreach and engagement. But in addition to that, what we're now clearly looking at is the reserve are people probably listening to this today that are out there with experiences and life skills that we would want to pick up on when they do come into the organisation to establish where might they be able to assist. So we're seeing with some of the reserve, for example in the DMR, some of the reserve have psychology backgrounds. They've assisted in terms of an understanding of mental health and social factors. So I think that's going to be a subtle change in what we do. Also with regards to our plans in around outreach and recruitment, you will have heard commentary with respect to the fact that we will be recruiting shortly through the Public Appointment Service. What we're currently looking at with respect to a good launch is learning the lessons from the Garda trainee outreach as well, in terms of getting the message out about the importance of the reserve. And we have been thinking about who may well want to apply into the reserve itself. And quite often it's been considered that it will only be people who possibly want to join the regulars, and they see that as an opportunity. That's not the case. We're hearing already of people showing interest, asking about when we're going to advertise, because they believe in what we do. They want to contribute. They mightn't necessarily want to give full time in terms of family commitments or other employment, but want to be able to join the organisation and to deliver. So we are going to be very much so focusing on a very concentrated outreach and advertisement campaign to try and optimise the numbers that actually do apply. And then currently the director of the Garda College is looking at what we have historically done in terms of training, and now looking at the key areas we believe the reserve will need development in, and also the model in which we will train. We're cognizant of the fact we still need to continue to deliver on training for the Garda trainees, and then also we want to look at when and how is it most appropriate to train people and develop people who may well have other life commitments also. And then I suppose specifically in terms of the deployment, we have pulled together a working group with respect to members from across the organisation to look at where best could the reserve assist going forward. And the intention will be that there will be ongoing engagement to ensure when individuals do come in, they're onboarded effectively, they're supported, and that we do ensure that they can give their best to the organisation. So there's huge opportunities with respect to growing the organisation, supporting volunteering approaches such as this. I suppose over the next number of weeks we will be communicating further in terms of the specific plan. The Public Appointment Service is currently working on that with regards to the recruitment process, and then also we will be able to update the Policing Authority further as to what the key facets of training will look like and deployment. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. I'm glad, and I think I heard you saying that whilst the majority might be on the beat, that you're looking at other areas where they can assist and they can do more than just on the pure operational on the ground.
Yeah, we very much so are looking at the fact that within our specialist areas as well, you, for example, may have somebody who's a forensic accountant working here in Dublin, want to join the reserve. yes, will be visibly operationally deployed at points in time, but we are seeing actually that's an asset we could use elsewhere within the organisation. So that's where we see the opportunities being immense, absolutely immense.
Certainly, the training is important, the direction deployment. But in the past, we've heard, comments about the inconsistency of approach within stations and how people are used. What are you going to do to try and drive that consistency, not just within the urban regions, but right across the country?
We've obviously heard that, and we've learned that from the feedback we've received, and there's a couple of things that have been built into the design to mitigate that risk. First and foremost, I've referred to the fact that there's a dedicated team now focusing on the Garda Reserve implementation within my own directorate itself, and they have been tasked to be very specific in terms of initial engagement with the local areas. The people are involved from the very beginning, the chief superintendents who are going to be responsible for this group of individuals. Also, there will be ongoing and active engagement with those who are recruited, and I think that's something we missed on before in terms of just learning from people. Do you actually feel we're doing everything possible to support you in delivering to your best? So there will be that as well. We will be building in a full programme management approach to not just the recruitment process, the outreach, through to the training, through to the deployment, and then an ongoing review. And I think what is critical is we have looked at having working group maintained with respect to key representation from the local areas, and that will be sharing practice in terms of what the reserve are doing in each of the areas. So it is designing it in from the very beginning to ensure it's considered in the recruitment the whole way through to deployment, and really to learn the lessons from before. And what I would want to say is the reserve have delivered significantly so for the organisation over the years. I wouldn't want any of this to be taken as other than that, but we cannot ignore people telling us we could have been deployed better and we could have given more. So
I'm delighted to hear it's not a one and done. This is going to be a feedback, a loop that actually will change and improve going forward. Thank you.
So first job of a chair is to make sure everything runs on time, and alas, I thank you in advance for your patience. We may finish at 5 or 10 past 5. My apologies. So Mr. Paul Meehan is now going to talk about policing and technology.
Thanks, Chair. So yeah, Commissioner, I think we're under a little bit of pressure in terms of time on this topic, so I'll try to keep this reasonably brief. I suppose there are 4 or 5 issues that I just want to touch on, and I don't really want to get into the technical side of this, partly at least because I don't really understand it. But I mean, if I can ask first of all, there's clearly been a lot of recent debate around the introduction of technology or additional technology to be deployed by Garda Síochána, both in terms of body-worn cameras, facial recognition, etc. And clearly, at one level, the introduction of new technologies has the potential for significant improvements and benefits for policing. Can you maybe briefly speak to what some of those benefits might be in terms of the challenges that Garda Síochána faces at the moment?
I think overall, for us, it's around a digital evidence management system. And that a lot of the focus has been on the body-worn cameras and what that means, or on the use of artificial intelligence and facial recognition as it's imagined to be. But the first point we need to start with is the digital evidence management system, and we get a huge amount of digital evidence. Yeah. Part of that would be from body-worn camera, and all of that would be subject to codes of practice on how all of that how it would be used. So that's all being worked through as we speak. But we also get a huge amount of information or evidence, which is from CCTV. From the disorder on the 23rd of November, there's something like 140 odd different systems of CCTV, and we're having to manage all of that. A digital evidence management system obviously assists with that. And that would be the same in nearly all investigations are now involve some element of trawl for CCTV, right down to more minor incidents and including road traffic collisions where CCTV would be sought. So even just the practical management of that huge amounts of digital data coming into the organisation. And at its nub, that's what this is about. And I know the debate has sort of spiralled off in very different directions, because then if you go to digital evidence management system, part of that then is about biometric identification, and biometric identification then takes you towards facial identification. It's only facial recognition if you're running it against some predetermined database. Andre, is there anything just briefly beyond that? Just
there's a lot, all right. Yeah, I suppose just to summarise it at a very high level, our digital strategy is about how we progressively acquire data, and the Commissioner's mentioned a number of sources there, be that CCTV. Increasingly, we're getting feeds in from other law enforcement agencies and other partner agencies and NGOs. Body-worn cameras will be a relatively small amount of footage, but all of that information has to be acquired, and it has to be identified, it has to be characterised, and it has to be stored, because it will be used in a digital evidence chain. The next piece then is how we process that information to prepare it for analysis, because the volumes that we're dealing with here, millions of emails literally on a server, tens of millions of images, tens of thousands of hours of footage. That's quantities and volumes that just cannot be processed or understood by any person. So it has to be processed in a way that it's boiled down into the pertinent information. And that's also important from a data protection and data privacy perspective. We don't want to be looking at emails, for example, that relate to people's personal life. We want to only look at the relevant emails. And the same goes for images as well. We only want to look at the images that are relevant to investigation. And typically they're a tiny portion of the images that might be obtained from a device or obtained in digital evidence. The next stage then is how we analyse that information in order to determine or to glean knowledge from it that will be relevant to the investigation, and then finally what action do we take on the back of it. So everything that we're doing is in support of that, all underpinned, as I said, by data privacy and data protection by design built into it. But just the key thing I suppose to understand is that this is about how do we possibly deal with the absolutely massive volumes that we're dealing with in terms of investigation. So digitalisation of society, the term that's often used, has led to what's called big data. And big data is not just characterised by the volumes that I touched on there. It's also characterised by the variety of information. So the Commissioner mentioned 140 different camera systems. There are literally hundreds and thousands of different formats. All of that has to be processed into a single format that we can use and we can work with. And then the final complexity that's characterised or that big data involves is its so-called velocity, or the rate at which it changes and it updates, so that you just cannot, a person cannot possibly deal with that unless they're supported by these digital systems.
And just on that, so I suppose the discussion that we wanted to have with you was around how you face that challenge, and because, as you say, it's going to be changing rapidly, even in terms of what you're dealing with at the moment. So, and there have been some concerns expressed. Commissioner, you mentioned them. I think some certainly at the Oireachtas Justice Committee. And I just wonder, do you first of all recognise the validity of concerns that have been raised, maybe particularly around facial recognition, but also other technological developments? And what can you say to reassure people that have those concerns? You touched on the possibility, or not the possibility, I think the obligation that you have to produce codes of practice, but what can you say to reassure people?
Well, I think one of the fears that's expressed is just, in effect, then random monitoring or group monitoring of individuals on any street or any protest, and that's not what this is about. This is actually about an aid to investigation. And so if we look at any crime or incident, we are using the material, the evidence that we would retrieve from CCTV to aid that investigation. Part of that might be around the identification of a suspect, but it's not our intention, and neither are we seeking the ability just in effect to sieve through the population at large as it makes its way about the towns and cities here in Ireland. That's not our position whatsoever. It might be the position in other societies, but it's not what we're seeking here, and we have to operate within very strict confines of what the EU directives are allowing in this place, and also then the European Convention of Human Rights, and indeed our own constitution as well. And we're very, very happy to do that. We want to use this as an aid to our investigative efforts. And as Andrea set out, there's just huge amounts of data are coming into the organisation, and we need some means by which to effectively investigate that. And this is illustrated in many of the cases that we've taken through the criminal courts, where just very small segments of CCTV, which have taken months to find, have proved really pivotal in terms of proving the case. And it is about us using the tools that are available to us to protect society through the prevention and detection of crime. But so that's what, at its essence of what this is, not the invasion of privacy, it's around protecting society.
But as those tools come online and come on stream, there clearly needs to be an approach, a principle-based approach, if you like, or a governance-based approach to manage all of that and to reassure people that those tools, regardless of what they are, whether it's body-worn cameras or facial recognition, will be used properly. I mean, there has been some discussion, and I just wanted to mention a few issues to see if you agreed with these issues that the guards may need to grapple with around this, perhaps in the code of practice. So a threshold for the use of new technologies, consultation with the public and other relevant groups, human rights proofing, independent audit of the use of such technology, public reporting on the use and its efficacy. I'm just wondering if those are the sorts of issues that you are currently thinking about around the deployment of this technology, and that might feed into, for instance, the development of the code of practice around body-worn cameras.
I think those are exactly the issues that need to be fleshed out in the codes of practice. Like we do wish this to be an area where there's public confidence in what Garda Síochána is doing. Yeah. We still pride ourselves, and we pride ourselves just in our connection to the community and public confidence in Garda Síochána. So we don't want the introduction of new technology to in some way erode that and what we seek to do. And the means by a means to achieve that would be through codes of practice, and then the oversight of the application of those codes of practice and how practically these things are happening. But a lot can be done, I understand, by the manner in which we implement these systems and what the system in the first place allows to happen. Andrew can help.
Sure.
Well,
just a couple of things on the specific points that you raised there, Paul. So first of all, in terms of consultation, so to take body-worn cameras as an example, so we have, just as you know, put out a request for tender for a proof of concept, and it is just a proof of concept for body-worn cameras to be used in Dublin, Waterford and Limerick specific stations within each of the three of those. So that does include a formal review, which we've outsourced to an expert in a barrister in human rights law. So the codes of practice are in draft format at the moment. They're being reviewed externally by a barrister from a human rights perspective. There is a consultation process that's already started, so we've started that internally with the unions and the associations, and with a test group of Garda members. So, for example, in the consultation process, we've run information sessions for over 2,000, or been attended by over 2,000 Garda members in pretty much every division in the country. And in terms of further consultation, next week we'll be starting both a public consultation process and with a set of NGOs and other stakeholders, including actually the policing authority, will be in touch with you to consult on the codes of practice. And it'll be exactly the same for the use of image analysis and recognition technology. And just in terms, I suppose, of the use of those again so-called sort of facial recognition technology, but the broader term is image analysis and recognition technologies, we've been very clear in our submission in paragraph 3.2 to the Justice Committee, which has been published by the Justice Committee. We've also published it as part of the Commissioner's monthly report, that there are 9 different use cases that we interpret for how this technology is being used. So we're being very transparent about how it's going to be used now and how it's going to be used in the future. But just to be kind of really clear, what we're talking about here is the greater application of tools that are already commonplace in every, and I say every, police force in the developed world. So, for example, when it comes to child sexual abuse material, we already have facial recognition technology, and we use it very successfully in analysing and in identifying cases of child pornography and, in fact, of child exploitation. So in the 185 cases that were detected last year of child pornography, in every one of those, facial recognition technology was a factor. We could not otherwise have processed literally millions of images in order to be able to boil those down and to identify the perpetrators and, in some cases, the victims. That also led directly then to the identification and not the automated identification, but it led indirectly to the identification of 50 victims who were subsequently rescued last year. That's as a direct result of the use of that technology. And the only thing I'd say about that is that that dates from 2017. That tool that we currently have, what we're looking to do is upgrade it to the latest technology, which is even more accurate and more useful, and then to be able to deploy what we've already used to other types of investigations. So this is not exactly new technology, although it is changing all the time. It's also worth noting that in every one of those hundreds of cases that has been prosecuted, in most cases there were guilty pleas, but in the ones that have come before the courts, there have been defence solicitors and other experts that have examined our processes, the technologies that we use. There's never been, in fact, a challenge, and certainly there's never been a successful challenge to the use of the technology. So it's really important, I suppose, to make the distinction that we are not looking to do live facial recognition as in some dystopian society or potential for the future. In fact, we've actually requested that that be excluded because we don't intend to use it. We also don't have a reference database that we can compare images against to identify people or do some mass surveillance. This is almost exclusively about how do we group victims and suspects based on anything from what they're wearing to other characteristics, including some biometric characteristics, to be able to boil down thousands, tens of thousands, even millions of images down to the ones that investigators can look at. So much has been made of accuracy, and I could go into that in more detail if you want, but the really key factor is that every single decision that could be made or could have an impact on a person is made by an accountable, identifiable member of Garda personnel. The machine makes no decisions whatsoever. All it does is to sift and search information to present a condensed set of manageable set of information for somebody to make a decision on. And that's quite different, I think, to other societies and other police forces. It's a very common approach, and we consult very widely with our colleagues in the EU. But there's a similar approach, obviously, to privacy. We're not, for example, following a UK model when it comes to live facial recognition. We're very tightly involved through the Europol expert group on artificial intelligence that our head of data architecture sits on, with tracking the progress of the EU AI Act to make sure that we move in conjunction with our partners. But, for example, if facial recognition was not available, then CSAM investigations, child sexual abuse investigations, would just stop. They couldn't possibly progress without the use of this technology. We're looking to broaden it out.
And just a final issue on that, because clearly some of the concerns, I think, around the levels of inaccuracy in terms of facial recognition technology that may particularly affect members of ethnic minority groups and women. That then is what you're saying to us, that those issues will not be as live in Ireland because of the absence of a database that you're using to compare images to?
Well, the technology is still doing matching of a sort, obviously, because what I'm talking about there is sifting, so being able to identify, once we pick up on somebody as a suspect or a victim, to be able to try and find all occurrences of them in the series. So it's still doing a degree of matching. So if the technology was inaccurate, then that would be, it wouldn't be a very reliable process, even though it's still down to the Garda member to make the final decision. But just on that, I mentioned that we are using at this stage 7-year-old facial recognition technology. There's never been a case that has made a mistake that has led to any form of a wrong arrest or certainly any kind of an incorrect prosecution. And as you know better than anyone, Paul, identification is absolutely the core part of any criminal court case. So if there was a mistake there, it would have been found. But just on the issue of accuracy, and this is something we go into in some detail in our submission to the Oireachtas committee. And just to be clear on what the latest technologies can do, the world acknowledged standard on how to measure accuracy of facial recognition technologies is the facial technology evaluation that's done by the US National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. They publish that twice a year. They evaluate 500 algorithms. They publish the version of that algorithm because these things change 5 or 6 times a year. And there's 2 aspects to accuracy of facial recognition. The first is the false matching ratio, where it incorrectly identifies somebody and says that this is the same person as in the image I've got, but it's got it wrong. And you're right that there is a difference between the most accurate demographic, which is Eastern European males, where it makes a mistake 1 in 10,000 times, compared to West African females, where it's least accurate, where it gets it wrong 1 in 150 times. So it's 70 times more inaccurate, so to speak, for West African females versus Eastern European males. But the difference in absolute terms is still negligible. It's still 99% plus accurate. And it's similar it's actually even better in the case of what's called the non-matching ratio. That's in the case where it should have found a match and failed to find a match. And in that case, its worst performing case is 0.16% for, as it turns out, South Asian males for some reason are the least accurate in that case. So the latest technologies are incredibly accurate, but the really key thing for us, and this is based again on the experience of every other law enforcement agency in Western countries, and I think the director of the NIST IT laboratory, Dr. Amin, put it best when he said that while the best performing algorithms are at least as good, if not better, than the best human facial recognition experts, it's only when the 2 are used in conjunction that you get the best results and you get the best protection of civil rights. But I guess again I can't emphasize enough that with 7-year-old technology, we've never had a mistake in the literally hundreds, probably thousands of cases that we've prosecuted at this stage. And in the case of the latest technologies, their accuracy, a bit like a chess computer, is far better than humans. But that's not good enough for us, and we only ever will use the 2 in conjunction, with the decision always being made by a person, never by the machine.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. It's very useful. Thank you.
And the detailed submission by the guards on the facial recognition technology is in the Commissioner's monthly report. So if members of the public want to see that submission, it's published in the Commissioner's monthly report. Dr. Debbie Donnelly has a question, and then I'm going to close the meeting.
Thanks, Chair. And just a very quick follow-up. I mean, clearly one of the concerns about image technology we've discussed here today, and you've provided some assurance around the approach Garda Síochána is taking. However, one of those concerns relates to the storage of images that are not relevant to investigations. And I suppose I wonder what your plans are, your approaches in terms of that sort of governance framework are in terms of the retention and therefore the destruction of images that are not necessary for particular investigations.
All right, okay.
Okay, so there's 2 points there, I suppose, to make, Debbie. So the first is there's been some, I suppose, publicity around the fact that we may have images that are large numbers of images that are not relevant to investigations, and those are mainly relating to the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children in the US that provides law enforcement agencies around the world with examples with suspected cases of child exploitation. So I suppose the first thing to note is that even though an image may not be directly relevant to an investigation, what that means is that it's classified as non-CSAM, so it's not a proven example of child sexual abuse material. But in many cases it is important to retain it, because non-CSAM doesn't mean that it isn't definitively CSAM. It may be that we're not able, for example, to determine the age of the victim, because if it's consensual over a certain age, then we still need to retain it. But just to go back to the point about retention, we are working on a retention policy. We've been in close contact with the Data Protection Commission, and we are working on a retention policy that we will then publish. But under the Law Enforcement Directive, we are entitled to retain information. In fact, we have to retain it for a certain period. But if something definitively is not useful and is not part of an investigation, and there's no chance it's going to form part of an investigation, then the retention policy will cover that, and we'll be removing it. And just to give one example of that, I suppose, of that, an aspect of retention policies in practice is again, perhaps some assumptions around the way that body-worn camera footage might be stored and it might be used, is that all body-worn camera footage, which won't be very much, probably only a few minutes per shift, will be retained for 30 days, but unless it's earmarked and tagged as useful to an investigation and tied to a specific investigation or the possibility of a complaint, then it's automatically deleted after 30 days. So that's just one example of the retention policies that we're putting in place, but we are working very closely with the Data Protection Commission to make sure that those retention policies are more law enforcement directive than GDPR, but they're compliant with data protection regulations and best practice.
Okay, many thanks to the Policing Authority and the Garda Síochána leadership team today for your contributions, and I now close the meeting. Thank you.